They're thousands of kilometres apart, but could Brexit and the America First policies of US President Donald Trump lead Europe to seek stronger economic ties with Asia? Hello, I'm Nathan King, sitting in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. Hello again. With populist movements and rising protectionism taking flight in Europe and the United States, traditional partnerships can no longer be taken for granted. Add to that forecasts of economic growth in the Asia-Pacific region, while industrial countries remain stagnant or in decline, and you have the kind of conditions that should lead the European Union to seek stronger ties with Asia. That's the thesis of a new report by Bertelsmann, one of Germany's largest private foundations. Later we'll talk to the author of that report, but we begin with CGTN's Mariam Zaidi in Brussels. Mariam, thanks for joining us. This would be a major shift, wouldn't it? Lay us out for us. What's the attraction for the European Union to forge closer ties with Asia economically?
Hi, Nathan. Well, we are seeing an EU pivot towards Asia-Pacific countries, in part due, of course, to protectionist views of Donald Trump and Brexit. Now, let's also not forget TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership between the EU and US, is on a permanent hold. People power pretty much killed it on the EU side. And the EU's pivot to Asia is highly strategic. It's about gaining really a foothold in a fast-changing region, but also for the EU to really inject their influence, democratic values, and impose EU standards in areas such as the environment on their trading partners. Now, trade, of course, played a major role in Jean-Claude Juncker, the EU Commission President's annual State of the Union address in Strasbourg back in September. Now, he called on EU member states to really greenlight new free trade agreements. New deals would also be stripped of controversial elements like in TTIP, such as special business tribunals to make them easier to ratify. And Juncker also said he wants Europe to not only repair its roof, but all the flaws. So the hope is that, it does also strengthen the union of the 27 EU member states post-Brexit.
Well, that's interesting, Mariam. The EU is still already negotiating trade agreements with a number of Asian countries. Japan's just been agreed to. But China's direct investment in Europe is really ramping up, isn't it? What can you tell us about that and the potential for, obviously, future investments as well?
Sure. Well, the EU is currently prepping for free trade talks with Australia, New Zealand, and it aims to conclude those, as well as ongoing negotiations with Japan by the end of Juncker's mandate in late 2019. So the EU is also beating the UK to the punch, you could say. The UK can't, of course, negotiate free trade agreements till it formally leaves the EU in March 2019. But the EU has a caveat in its new free trade agreements. It says that it may be open for business, but it wants reciprocity. Now to China, it's long been a prickly issue for the EU. China is now the EU's second biggest trading partner behind the US. And we are, of course, seeing warmer ties between the two. Everything was, of course, very cordial at the EU-China summit in June this year. And both sides have, of course, adopted a joint 2020 strategic agenda for cooperation. But the EU wants to ensure that China trades fairly, respects intellectual property rights, and meets its obligations as a member of the World Trade Organization. Now, another example is India. In 2016, trade between the EU and India stood at around 77 billion euros. So, of course, there's a big opportunity there. Now, in October, of course, the EU Presidents Tusk and Juncker were in New Delhi for a joint summit. But despite really political statements, there was no real significant progress on trade talks. So there's, of course, a lot of opportunity, but can they get there? Nathan?
Thanks, Mariam. That's CGTN's Mariam Zaidi reporting from Brussels. There's